You study for hours and the next day you remember almost nothing. Why does your brain erase up to 70% of what you learn in just 24 hours? Why do some students constantly struggle while others are able to memorize thousands of complex characters and remember them for decades? And most unsettlingly, what if the real problem isn't your effort or your intelligence, but the way you were taught to study? Stay with me because what you're about to discover can change your way of learning forever. You study for hours, you highlight, you read the same chapter over and over. You review your notes until you can almost recite them while looking at the page. At that moment, you feel like you've mastered the content. It seems clear, it seems logical, it feels like you remember it. But the next day, when you try to explain it without looking, something changes. Ideas become blurry, details disappear, and what seems solid crumbles away. It's not an isolated feeling. Research shows that without the right approach, the brain removes about 70% of new information in the first 24 hours. It's not that you're lazy. It's not that you lack discipline. It's not that you aren't smart. It's simply how your mind works. There is something called the forgetting curve, and it's the reason why most of what we learn disappears almost immediately. Within a single day, a large part of the knowledge begins to fade. By the end of the week, if it hasn't been worked on correctly, almost nothing remains clearly. What seemed like deep understanding was only a momentary illusion. This is where many make a silent mistake. They confuse familiarity with mastery. Rereading notes gives a sense of progress. Highlighting makes it look like we are working actively. Studying the night before an exam creates a false impression of productivity. But the brain treats those methods as background noise. Just like an ad you skip without thinking. It's there, but it's not processed deeply. And so the inevitable question arises. If this system fails over and over again, why do we keep using it? Because it's what we were taught. Because it seems logical. Because it's comfortable. But comfort doesn't mean effectiveness. Now there is a surprising truth that completely changes this story. In Japan, thousands of students memorize extremely complex characters and remember them for decades. We aren't talking about small lists of words. We are talking about entire writing systems. And they don't do it by putting in more hours than you. They don't do it because they have different brains. They do it because they use different techniques. The difference isn't in the effort, it's in the method. Japanese students don't rely on mechanical repetition or endless sessions of passive review. They use specific strategies that fix information in a lasting way without needing to study longer. Techniques that work with the brain, not against it. The good news is that you don't need to become a neuroscience expert or completely change your life to apply these principles. After analyzing the strategies used in Japan's best schools and personally testing these methods, it's possible to reduce everything to 5 clear and applicable techniques. And the first of them completely changes what you thought you knew about studying. Most students make a fundamental mistake without realizing it. They believe that learning consists solely of putting information into the brain, reading more, listening more, highlighting more, watching more videos. But here is the truth that changes everything. Real learning doesn't happen when you put information into your mind, but when you force it out. This is called active recall, and it's one of the most powerful tools that exist to strengthen memory. When you try to remember something without looking at your notes, something seemingly uncomfortable happens. You doubt, you block. You feel like you don't know as much as you thought. And many interpret that feeling as a failure. But it's not. In reality, it's exactly the opposite. Every time you force your brain to retrieve information without help, you are building stronger neural connections. It's like training a muscle. When you lift weights, the muscle doesn't grow because you look at it, but because you challenge it. The effort is what strengthens it. The same thing happens with memory. The moment you struggle to remember is the moment your brain is becoming more powerful. That little mental discomfort is not a sign of inability, it's a sign of growth. Now, how is this applied in practice? It's simpler than you imagine. Close the book, put away the notes, take a completely blank sheet of paper, and write down everything you can remember about the topic without looking, without checking, without help. At first, it will be uncomfortable. Maybe you only remember fragments. Maybe it surprises you how little you actually retain. But that is precisely the point. That mental friction is what activates the consolidation process. While most waste time passively rereading the material, which generates a dangerous sense of false confidence, you will be using a method that transforms information into real knowledge. You won't be reviewing by inertia, you'll be mastering the content. The difference is profound. Reading several times can make something feel familiar, but trying to explain it without support reveals if you truly understand it. And when you do it repeatedly, the memory becomes faster, clearer, and more stable. Japanese students don't just absorb information. They actively practice retrieval. They test themselves constantly. They don't wait for the exam to discover what they don't know. They discover it during the process. And that completely changes the result. When you transform study into an exercise in active retrieval, learning stops being fragile. It becomes something solid, something you can use, something that stays. But this is only the first step, because actively remembering is powerful, yes. However, there is another Japanese technique that transforms the way you build skills from the ground up. And it begins with a very simple idea. Move forward bit by bit every day. Imagine building knowledge as if you were stacking blocks on top of each other. Each piece fits perfectly before adding the next one. There's no rush, no abrupt jumps, just constant and balanced progress. That is the essence of the Kumon method. Unlike intensive last-minute studying, which tries to shove large amounts of information in at once and ends up saturating the brain, the Kumon method breaks learning down into small, daily steps that truly consolidate. It's not about studying more, it's about studying better. In Japan, this system is based on structured and progressive repetition. Every day between 15 and 30 minutes of focused practice. Not endless hours, not exhausting sessions, just consistency. And that consistency turns skills into something automatic, almost instinctive, like riding a bicycle. At first, it requires attention. Then, it simply flows. This approach isn't a simple educational philosophy. It has scientific backing. James Clear, author of the bestseller Atomic Habits, showed that improving just 1% each day can multiply progress up to 37 times in a year. The Kumon method applies exactly that principle. You master an exercise today, tomorrow you add one more, then another, and without realizing it, what used to seem complex becomes natural. Solving difficult equations stops being intimidating because the foundation is solid. Each small advance reinforces the next. The secret isn't in extreme intensity, but in micro-progression. By focusing on small and constant improvements, you avoid the frustration that appears when you try to cover too much at once. Your brain doesn't overload, it adapts, it strengthens, it integrates. This system works not only in math, but also in languages, music, or any skill that requires cumulative practice. The key is simple but powerful. Master the basics before moving forward. While many study with anxiety, trying to cover the entire syllabus at once, the Kumon method bets on strategic patience. Every day adds up. Every day builds. Every day consolidates. And the result isn't just passing an exam, it's acquiring skills that stay for years, skills that don't evaporate after a week. But even daily progress needs a system that ensures what is learned isn't lost over time. Because moving forward is important, yes, but keeping what has been learned is even more so. And that's where the next technique comes in. Imagine that your memory is like a plant. You don't water it by flooding it with water just once. If you did, the excess would be lost and the roots wouldn't absorb what's necessary. Instead, you water it little by little at strategic moments, allowing it to grow strong and stable. That's how spaced repetition works. Instead of concentrating all your study into a single intense session, this method proposes reviewing the information just before it begins to fade from your memory. Not too early, not too late, exactly at the right time. First, you review the content 24 hours after having studied it, then 72 hours later, then a week later, and later a month later. Each review strengthens the memory and extends the time the information remains available in your mind. This system directly combats the forgetting curve. Instead of allowing knowledge to disappear, you strategically reinforce it before it weakens. It's a conscious, planned, and effective process. In Japan, students don't rely on studying the night before the exam. They don't improvise. They follow a system of constant review that keeps the information fresh and accessible. The key isn't repeating aimlessly, but reviewing at the exact moment the memory begins to deteriorate. Every time you return to the material at those intervals, the neural connection becomes stronger. What used to be fragile becomes stable. What used to require effort becomes natural. Spaced repetition transforms study into a cumulative process. You don't start from scratch every time. You build on what has already been consolidated. But there is something even more powerful than reviewing at the right times. There is a principle that changes the way you understand daily progress. And it's based on an extremely simple idea: getting a little better every day. Japanese students don't rely on desperate last-minute efforts. They don't wait to feel pressure to act. Instead, they apply a principle known as Kaizen, which means continuous improvement through small, constant actions. The idea is simple, but its impact is profound. If you improve just 1% each day, the cumulative effect over time is extraordinary. It doesn't seem like much in a single day. A small adjustment, a small advance. But when it's repeated day after day, progress multiplies. This approach eliminates the burnout and stress caused by trying to change everything at once. There's no need for marathon sessions or extreme sacrifices, just consistency. And the most surprising thing is that you can apply this principle by dedicating just 6 minutes a day. 2 minutes of active recall, 2 minutes of spaced repetition, and 2 minutes of focused practice, nothing more. In 1 month, that minimum discipline can make you 30% better than when you started. Not by magic, not by special talent, but by strategic accumulation. Kaizen shows that success doesn't depend on bursts of motivation, but on small daily commitments. Every day counts. Every day adds up. Every day builds. But even with effective techniques and constant progress, an essential element is missing. Because mastering a skill doesn't just depend on the method. It also depends on the mental state with which you study, and that's where the last technique comes in. Mastering a skill doesn't consist solely of applying the right techniques. It also requires the right state of mind. In Japan, there is a concept called SU, which represents a state of intense concentration in which the student immerses themselves completely in the task at hand. There are no distractions, no multitasking, no divided attention, only total focus. To reach that level of concentration, students follow small rituals that send a clear signal to the brain. It's time to learn. It's not about superstition, it's about conditioning the mind. A specific study space, a pen you always use, lighting a candle before starting, small repeated gestures that turn learning into a deliberate and meaningful act. When you transform study into a ritual, your brain begins to associate that environment and those actions with deep concentration. Resistance decreases, clarity increases, information absorption improves. Deep focus isn't something that happens by accident. It is built, it is trained, it is reinforced. Instead of studying surrounded by distractions and expecting extraordinary results, Sue proposes complete immersion, an absolute presence in the task. And when you combine this mental state with active recall, spaced repetition, and daily improvement, learning stops being fragile. It becomes something solid and lasting. Now everything depends on you. Now the decision is in your hands. Think of the last time you truly mastered something. Maybe it was a sport, maybe a video game, maybe a specific skill. You didn't improve simply by watching, you didn't improve by waiting. You improved by practicing, making mistakes, adjusting, and trying again. That is how real learning happens. It shouldn't be an exhausting struggle or a race against the clock the night before an exam. It shouldn't depend on anxiety or the fear of forgetting. Learning can be smart. It can be strategic. It can be much simpler than you imagine when you use the right method. You can go back to your old habits of rereading, highlighting, and hurriedly memorizing only to later forget. Or you can start today to apply these Japanese techniques. The difference isn't in talent, it's in action. The top 1% don't just listen and go about their usual routine. They act, they test, they adjust, they improve. The real question is simple. Are you going to do the same? Choose one of these strategies and apply it today. Not tomorrow, not next week, today. Tell me in the comments which one you decide to try and which one works best for you. And if you want to keep learning how to study smarter and more effectively, subscribe for more tips on productivity and success. Change your life one small step each day. That is the simplest path